So just a recap, we are in the Republic of Rome, and we are under the subheading of the Republic Wars in Italy. We're covering here from 389 to 247 BC, and we are in chapter number 3, covering the Greek invasion, and this goes from 280 to 275. That's where we're at right here. Now you see the dark green area, that's pretty much what Rome owns right now. So once again, now that the buffer states are gone, Rome is now butted up against the Magna Graecia area in southern Italy. These were a lot of Greek colonies, and the Greek city-state of Tarentum had called on any Greek nation to come and help them against domineering Romans. And the person who answered this call is from the red area of Epirus. His name was King Pyrrhus, and he was nicknamed the Eagle. He was a pretty capable commander. He was the cousin of Alexander the Great, and he wanted to accomplish in the west what Alexander had accomplished in the east. So King Pyrrhus, he lands in Lucania area at Tarentum with 25,000 men and 20 war elephants. Now, he was almost certain to receive help from allies in Italy once he landed. Now, Plutarch's account describes a storm that only the Pyrrhus's flagship, which was most likely a septereme, and because it was so big and heavy, was able to withstand the storm and land at Tarentum. Most of his troops took a while, were getting battered in the storm, and didn't arrive on time. Whatever the precise terms between him and the Tarentines, he was very careful not to offend them at this point until the rest of his army arrived. However, once his army arrived, he took full charge of the military situation. He closed the whole city down of entertainment, sports, suspended any festivities, and he conscripted the population for military service. And this is a shot of Tarentum, some ancient ruins here, but Pyrrhus soon learned that a large Roman army was approaching him. And the large force of allies which had been promised to him by the Tarentines had not yet arrived, and Pyrrhus would have gladly waited for these allies, and he was staying in the city and waiting for them. But this is exactly what the Romans didn't want to happen. They knew he was waiting for more men, and they were going to push the issue. However, to delay any longer would have left all the initiative to the Romans, and this would have been strategically inadvisable and bad for the morale of his men. He therefore led his men out to confront the Romans. Now, he sent forward a herald to inquire whether the enemy would accept him as an arbitrator between the Tarentines and the Romans. But the Romans neither wanted him as an arbitrator or feared him. Now, Pyrrhus had camped near Heraclea, but he was still determined to wait for his reinforcements. But as the Romans neared the river Pyrrhus, he was impressed by their good order and military discipline, which he remarked to one of his officers. This seemed surprising in barbarians, but more than ever, he wanted to wait for his reinforcements. And the Romans were going to prevent this, so the Romans were drawing up on the other side of the river. Pyrrhus, still trying to just delay the Romans from crossing the river, just deployed one unit to block that, but the Romans were ready to cross at multiple fordable points on the river, and so Pyrrhus, in fear of being surrounded, had to pull back, allow the Romans across, and then deploy for battle. Now, the Roman consul Lavinius marches down with 35,000 troops, and he crosses the river and he faced the enemy. Pyrrhus attacks. Adopting the time-honored tactics of Alexander the Great, he left his phalanx to hold the front while he himself led the cavalry charge with about 3,000 horse. But unlike Alexander, he had timed the move badly. His attack came too late. The Romans themselves were usually weak in cavalry, but on this occasion they were well supported by their Italian allies. So Pyrrhus had to order his phalanx to attack. Now, they were not usually used for an offensive role to come in and crash the enemy. They were there to hold the line. But Pyrrhus had to use them as an offensive weapon, and they would usually get surrounded by the enemy cavalry. However, the elephants frightened the Roman horse, and they were not able to control the horses. And so the Thessalonian cavalry of King Pyrrhus was able to overcome the Roman cavalry and drive them from the field. Now, even though this won the battle, it was not a decisive victory. The Romans lost 7,000 men to the Ephraim 4,000. Now, this is heavy losses for both sides, especially for King Pyrrhus, who lost most of those 4,000 men from the Ephraim Phlegonus. And Pyrrhus didn't have the resources to draw on experienced Ephraim troops who knew how to fight in a phalanx formation. And you gotta remember that even the Ephraim phalanx was not the same phalanx that Alexander the Great had. Okay, it wasn't as good, but still they were trained and experienced in it, where the allies that he was going to draw from Italy did not fight that way. But regardless, it is a victory for Pyrrhus and the Greeks. Pyrrhus did possess the Roman camp, and his prestige was very much enhanced, so that many of the hesitant Lucanians, Samnites, and other allies whom he had waited in vain before the battle now joined him. So the following year, with Pyrrhus, he did not expect to take Rome, but he advanced northwards toward Rome, and he came within 37 miles of the walls of Rome, but he was hoping to negotiate out of strength. However, his presence did not intimidate the Romans, and there was no fear that he would detach their allies from them or ravage their lands or lay siege to the Rome itself. None of this induced them to make peace terms, which would safeguard the Tarentines. Their friendship remained conditional on the unconditional departure of Pyrrhus and his army from Italy. That's all Rome was demanding, and they would not stop until he did that. Now, 2 Roman consular armies had been brought up to strength and remained at large in Italy. Pyrrhus could not afford to ignore them. They might threaten his rear, they might threaten his communications, they might threaten his allies. Above all, his prestige and morale were at stake. He must not appear reluctant to engage the enemy. He broke off negotiations and he went campaigning again. This time he confronts the Romans at Asculum in Apulia. Now, this battle was in 279. It's the Battle of Asculum. And he was fighting them on rough and wooded ground, which gave little opportunity for his elephants or his cavalry. And it turned this fight into an infantry engagement. Now, the ground seems to have hampered the phalanx, and the Romans prolonged this battle all day, and night fell without a decision being reached. On the following day, though, Pyrrhus strived to fight on open ground, which was less to the enemy's advantage, giving them no occasion for the tactics of their flexible response, such as they adopted in the ground the day before. Now, even so, the Romans, with their short swords, they were striving desperately to reach a decision before the elephants could be brought into action. It seems like in this battle, from what we read in the narratives, that the Roman short sword seems to have been a match for the long pikes of the Greek phalanx. However, in the end, once again, the elephants had provided the opportunity for Pyrrhus's cavalry to win the day. This is where we really get his term, the Pyrrhic victory, because even though he was winning the battles, it was costing him too much. Hieronymus puts the figures at 6,000 Roman casualties to 3,500 Ephraim Greeks. And it was at the end of this battle that Pyrrhus complained, "Another such victory and we are lost." Now, King Pyrrhus was a brave and inspiring and a flamboyant commander who was well capable of keeping his head even in the middle of a most desperate fight. Yet, he does not seem to have excelled as a strategist or a tactician, because at Heraclea, by waiting for reinforcements, he conceded a valuable initiative to the Romans, and he never received the reinforcements for which he was waiting for. And then his timing of the cavalry charge that opened the battle was also tardy. Now at Asculum, he didn't make the right choice of ground until a day later, after a hard-fought lesson was taught him. At this point, two warlike prospects now invited Pyrrhus. One, he can go back to Greece and help the Greeks because the Celtic hordes were invading from the north, or he can go to Sicily and help the Greek cities there against the Carthaginians. And he was always wanting to champion Greek civilization, so he chose to go to Sicily. I'm not going to go into detail of that. And he did have some success against the Carthaginians. However, he was not able to take Lilybaeum because he didn't possess a fleet to confront the Carthaginians with. And the Carthaginians were willing to make peace at this point with him, but he refused. So it turned into a stalemate. And then at this time, the Tarentinians reported to him that they were being hard pressed by the Romans again. So this gave the king a good reason to leave Sicily and go back and help the Tarentines. Now it must be mentioned here that the Carthaginians and the Romans had various treaties, and Polybus, he mentions 3 treaties that had to deal with Pyrrhus' invasion. And so they were making treaties how to deal with the Greeks and how to deal with slaves, how to deal with what territories they can enter, and so forth. So the Carthaginians and the Romans are having commitments to each other at this time. Now, as Pyrrhus was coming back to Italy, it was hampered by the Carthaginians had attacked some of his ships. The Maritimes had fought his forces as he was leaving Italy. The Carthaginians transported 500 Roman soldiers to Rhegium to reinforce and bolster the defenses of that city, so King Pyrrhus couldn't use that. So it was a tough return, but he did come back. And as he returned, there were still thousands of Samnites, Bruttians, Licanians, Sabines, and Italiotes that joined his Ephraite troops. Now, it must be said, though, that the Samnites were very disillusioned against King Pyrrhus because he abandoned their cause already once to go to Sicily. So a lot of them did switch sides to the Romans at this point. Now, the Battle of Beneventum took place at 275. It pitted Pyrrhus against the consul Manius Curius. Now, let me first mention about night attacks. Night attacks in ancient warfare were notoriously prone to miscarry. And if you remember Alexander at Gaugamela, he was tempted into a night operation and he refused to do it. But Pyrrhus, which was no exception to the rule, decided to conduct a night operation. Now Curius took up a strong position at Beneventum. Pyrrhus opened the battle with the night attack. He selected his best troops and the best elephants to march through a dense forest, but the Greeks misjudged the distance, and their torches went out before day broke, and the night, which was extremely black that evening, they faltered and got lost. Only when it was light did they manage to emerge from the undergrowth and were easily spotted by the Romans. The well-trained Romans sprang to arms and drove off the attackers with considerable losses, including 8 elephants. With this success, Curius, who was somewhat cautious, attacked Pyrrhus' position on the nearby plain and had success on one of the wings where the allied troops were and not the Greek phalanx. But Pyrrhus turned the tide with a cavalry charge just like Alexander did at Gaugamela. The attack was repulsed by Ephraite's stubborn resistance and with the use of some elephants. The Romans fell back to their camp, but they learned from their earlier defeats and had cohorts stationed at the camp for just such an occasion. So the Romans had made a second assault with fresh troops. They hurled their javelins and spears, which managed to stampede some of the elephants, and a young elephant went crazy looking for its mother and went back and smashed through the phalanx. The Romans then followed up the attack into the disorganized phalanx and put a sudden end to the battle. This ended King Pyrrhus' invasion of Italy, and Pyrrhus was killed 3 years later in Epirus. Before he died, he warned his fellow countrymen that if something isn't done about these Romans, we will soon be fighting them in our own land. So the Battle of Beneventum took place in 275 BC. At 272 BC, the Roman troops seized Tarentum, destroyed its defenses. 2 years later, the subjugation of southern Italy was complete with the capture of Rhegium on the toe of the peninsula. The Republic of Rome was now master of all Italy, from the Rubicon to the Strait of Messina. So this brings us to chapter 5, our last chapter in the Republic Wars in Italy. And it's the war with Carthage. Now, these are two great empires, similar in size. Carthage is probably a little bigger. And like I said here in Italy, once the Romans get rid of the buffer states that are between two powers, then their borders come together and it's inevitable to start a war. Now, this war was actually started by the Mamertines, which were the mercenary groups that occupied Messina and controlled it, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit here. But the invitation that Rome received was way too enticing for them, with the Carthaginians right across the Strait of Messina, for them to pass up, and they got involved against Carthage for the Romans to remove it. And so the Romans did intervene in 264 BC, which starts the First Punic War. We get the Punic Wars from the Latin word puni, which was what the Romans called the Carthaginians based on their ancestral tribes of the Phoenicians. Now, Rome's problem here was they weren't really a naval power, and the Carthaginians were, so they required a fleet to fight the Carthaginians, and they needed a heavier ship. Now I just want to talk about the galleys of those times, because I even thought, but I believe a trireme originally was thought to be called so because it had the three banks of oars. You see how the three oars, one was on top of another, but that may not have been totally accurate, because what it may have meant was that there was 3 rowers per section of oars from bow to stern. Because what happens is when Rome built the quinquereme, which was actually a model copied from a captured Carthaginian ship, and because it was labeled with the Latin word quin, people thought it had 5 banks of oars originally. Historians thought so, but as you can see, that was not the case. If you look at any of their ships, there was not 5 banks of oars. There were still only 3 banks of oars, but what they did was they just added more rowers to each row. So it was 5 rowers in each section, but they still had 3 banks of oars, one on top of the other. Now, the quinqueremes did have crews of 300 compared to 200 to the trireme. And so they could put, 100 soldiers on these. So they were more capable ships. They were heavier and a little bit slower. Rome's naval victories were more tactical and innovative than anything else, because Rome denounced the traditional ramming maneuvers, which limited their fighting tactics, but they concentrated more on boarding tactics, and they invented a thing called the corvus, which allowed them to virtually fight a land battle at sea, and it was this device that allowed them to win most of their sea battles. Now, they did stop using the corvus in about 10 years, in 255, because it was too heavy and it would capsize a lot of the galleys. Now, Because the Roman galleys weren't used for ramming, this made their navy much more viable as a strategic arm, because it could not only be used for transporting armies or fighting, but it could do both at the same time and therefore control the seaways. The First Punic War brought 9 major engagements between the Carthaginians and Romans, and the Romans won 5 of those 9. Now, the first conflict was at Messina in 264. Now, what had happened is the Syracusans, they hired the mercs, the Mamertines, to seize Messina. It was a seaport crucial to control Sicily, but the Mamertines controlled it for themselves. So the Syracusan commander, Hero II, called on the Carthaginians to help them get the port back. So they made separate assaults on the port, but the Carthaginians actually had succeeded in one of their assaults in taking the city, and then they kept Messina for themselves. So the Mamertines called on Rome to help get their city back from the Carthaginians, and the Romans were only too happy to step in. And so the Romans captured it from Carthage. Now, Syracusans, Hero II, they were alarmed by these new neighbors here in Sicily, so they attacked the Romans twice at Messina, but the Romans drove them back. Then the Romans pursued the Syracusans, and the Syracusans sued for peace, and they became an ally of Rome against the Carthaginians, and Rome made Messina a free state under Roman protection. Now, as the Roman and Carthaginian navies were maneuvering around Sicily, there became a minor clash, and I give this to the Carthaginians. I give them a win for this. I give the Romans a loss. It came off north of Sicily at the Lipara Islands, because Rome lost 17 quinqueremes here under General Gaius Cornelius Scipio. And a year later, the new consular, Gaius Duilius, met Hanno's Carthage fleet at Mylae. Now, this was a major naval battle. You can really say this was Rome's first sea battle. It took place at 260 at Mylae. And even though Rome had fewer ships, the Roman boarding tactics defeated Hanno, because once the Roman infantry became engaged in the hand-to-hand fighting, they defeated the Carthaginians. Carthage lost 50 ships, 3,000 men, and the Romans took 7,000 prisoners. And with this defeat, the Romans had protected Messina, because the Carthaginians were trying to maneuver on Messina and invade Italy, and the Romans kept Carthage from invading Italy. Now, after winning the naval encounter at Mylae, the Roman and Carthaginian ships meet again at Economus at 256, so 4 years later. And Rome was sending an invasion ships to Carthage under Marcus Atilius Regulus, and he was challenged by Hanno's 350 ships, who again had a slight edge over the Romans. The Romans had 330 ships. Now, Hanno had attacked in a semicircle, and the Romans fought back hard with its grappling and hand-to-hand tactics. 300,000 men took part in this ancient naval battle. Regulus formed a wedge formation and drove right through the center of the Carthaginians. Then one wing had circled left, one circled right, and surrounded the Carthaginian ships. The boarding tactics did the rest. The Romans lost 24 ships. Hanno had lost 94, with 64 of those ships being captured by the Romans. And then Regulus went on to invade Africa. Now, this brought a land battle at the city of Tunis in 255. So Regulus landed there with 4 legions, 17,000 strong, and demanded Carthage surrender. But instead of keeping the defenders in the city, Regulus allowed them to come out and form up for battle. Now, in charge of this was a Spartan general, Xanthippus, who commanded 12,000 infantry, 4,000 cavalry, and 100 elephants. Now, Regulus lined up his legions one behind the other instead of the usual checkerboard fashion. This worked great against the elephants, because the Roman ranks let the elephants pass right through them, and then they annihilated the elephant arm. But the expert Carthaginian cavalry hit the flanks, and it was all over. Only 2,500 Romans out of the 12,000 had escaped back to Rome. Rome had continued, in the next 8 years to get to Africa and invade it, but they weren't having a lot of success. But in Sicily they were having better success, and they had taken Agrigentinum, which was a Carthage port on Sicily. Now Rome launched a new attack to drive the Carthaginians from Sicily, and they met at a place called Panoramus in 251. Now Rome had taken Palermo. Now the commander of the Carthaginians, Hasdrubal, sent his son Hanno to try to retake that city, which was defended by Lucius Metilius. When Carthage advanced on the city, Valetti came out to hold the elephants off, but were driven back by the elephants, and the elephants had continued to charge at them, and the elephants were driven into a large ditch around the city, and many of the elephants were killed. Then Metilius had he sortied out from the city with his legionnaires, and then he routed Hasdrubal. This battle cost the Carthaginians their entire elephant force, and Rome now headed to Lilybaeum, the last stronghold on Sicily. Now Lilybaeum became a conflict for 9 years, from 250 to 241. 10,000 Carthaginians held the stronghold. The Roman force tried to storm the city but could not break through, so they laid the siege to it, and this is why it lasted for years. They invested heavily in the outer walls but couldn't get through the ramparts. Meanwhile, the Carthaginian fleet succeeded in resupplying the city by getting through the Roman vessels, and the city had held out. And I give the Roman army a loss for the siege of Lilybaeum here, because they could not take it from the Carthaginians. Now the following year, a new counselor, Publius Claudius, took command. The entire Roman fleet, 123 quinqueremes, encountered the Carthaginian fleet. The Carthaginian superior seamanship won the day, and Rome lost 93 ships and 8,000 men. Carthage didn't lose one ship, but despite this, Carthage couldn't raise the siege at Lilybaeum, and Rome had to continue the siege now there with only land forces, which was going to make this really tough. Now, the last battle in the First Punic War takes place at the Aegidas Islands in 247. The defense of the fortress Lilybaeum in Sicily was directed by Hamilcar Barca, which was Hannibal's father. And in 241, the Romans had rebuilt their fleet up to 200 quinqueremes under Catulus. And they encountered the Carthaginians, who had complete command of the ocean right now. Now, during a heavy storm, the Romans wiped out the Carthaginian fleet, destroying 70 of their vessels. Although Lilybaeum held out, Carthage had to sue for peace, because without a navy, Barca could not hold Sicily, and even Africa would be threatened. So Carthage, in their treaty, handed over Sicily, which was an island that they had controlled for 250 years. And Rome had took Sicily now as its first province. Rome's battle record is now 23-10. Now also, evacuated from this island, raised there, was 6-year-old Hannibal, and he swore never to be a friend of Rome.